Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So this is a follow-up to our last Market Watch where we talked about cards that were being released in some way from the list. Today we're talking about cards that weren't necessarily on the list itself, but were affected by the list in one way or another. Maybe players were expecting a card to get hit and it didn't, and everyone seeing the card untouched has caused a bunch of people to try to buy it out. Or maybe a key card for an archetype was unbanned, so everyone turned and started buying out other cards for the deck. At any rate, I did want to wait a few days to allow the prices to cool down, because often if we look at the prices immediately after the list drops, those prices can be super inflated and unrealistic, but now we should have a clearer picture of where prices are going to be staying. Let's get started. So first up, we're taking a look at everyone's favorite card of the last format, Mystic Mine. Now Mystic Mine was definitely a card that everyone assumed was going to be on the list, either banned or limited, but I think to everyone's surprise the card was not touched at all. Depending on who you ask, Mystic Mine is either a completely toxic card that makes the game really degenerate, or it's a necessary balance to counter a lot of the overpowered decks and just forces you to play different outs. Personally, I think the game would be much better off without it. When you can rely on this card to allow burn decks to win big events in 2022, it definitely seems like this is a problematic card. What no one can deny though is how powerful and game-changing the card is, forcing everyone to be prepared for it if they do hope to do well at any large event. Now, because of the expectation that this card would be banned, but the card instead going untouched, people immediately jumped on buying out copies of Mystic Mine all across the board. The secret rares from the 2020 tins are the highest rarity, and those shot up to $20 to $25 when the list first dropped, though they have since settled back down to around $17. The supers were up at $15, they are now back down to around $12. And the gold rares did hit $10 to $11 at one point. They have now cooled back down to about the $7 mark. Overall, the card is still up, and it looks like it's going to terrorize us for yet another format, though I think it should be only a matter of time before the card is eventually hit. Definitely a card that you'll want to own a set of, because this card can be a great equalizer for any side deck regardless of what you're playing, but probably something that you'll want to dump copies of later in the format as we get closer to the next ban list. The next card is another thing that a lot of players were expecting to see hit, but actually went untouched. It's the Rite of a Ramazir. The Adventurer token engine is definitely one of the strongest generic engines that has ever been released in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It effectively allows you to turn one card into 4 resources, and it can provide you with a negate and or multiple ways to break through your opponent's board. For a little while, it seemed like a lot of different decks were abusing it, from the early days of Punk Synchro to Dragon Link to even Sprites. It just seemed like it was a little bit too easy to mesh with basically anything. For that reason, a lot of people assumed that it was going to get hit, and that we'd be seeing Rite and Water Enchantress going to 2, the same way that they did early on in the OCG. However, the entire engine is actually untouched now, I guess as Konami decided that the engine just wasn't broke enough compared to the other cards and engines that we're going to be getting in the game to feel like it needs to be addressed. Because of this, Rite of a Ramazir did see a significant jump up in price, going from down between $30 and $35 to now almost hitting the $50 mark. A very significant price jump. I think we should expect to continue to see the Adventurer token engine see competitive play over the next couple of formats. While it probably isn't the best decker engine, especially with the Ishizu stuff coming out, it probably will remain a very strong engine that can boost some rogue strategies. It's worth noting that although Water Enchantress is also an important part of the engine, it actually has an extra printing with the Ultimate Rare version in OTS Tournament Pack 19, and so the ultra rare copies of Water Enchantress haven't really moved much in terms of price. If you don't already have the engine, you might just want to wait a little bit before picking it up as the ban list hype dies down. Depending on how much success it sees this upcoming format, we may not need to see the Adventurer token engine hit at all, and you can probably get some good mileage out of it. Next up, we'll take a look at 2 cards from different engines that are potentially going to be used more by the Sprite deck. On the list, one of the very significant bans was Ronin Totem, a piece of the Frog engine that was dumped with Swap Frog and helped to facilitate making Totally Awesome very easily. However, without Ronin Totem in the game, the deck will be built a bit differently. Some people are still looking at Swap Frog and playing around with the engine differently, while some are wanting to cut it all together and replacing it with something else. One of the engines being looked at is the Nimble engine, consisting of Nimble Angler and Nimble Beaver. Beaver allows you to summon another copy of itself from the deck or graveyard, a useful piece that can be normal summoned out to go into Gigantic Sprite on its own. However, with Sprite Sprint coming out in Darkwing Blast, people are looking more at running Nimble Angler. Sprint allows you to dump a level 2 monster from your deck to the graveyard, and Angler is a level 2 that, when sent to the graveyard, summons 2 level 3 or lower Nimble monsters directly out of your deck, which could include 2 copies of Beaver that you could then use for an Xyz play. This is cool because it also gets this effect if it's sent from the hand to the graveyard, so Nimble Angler isn't too much of a dead draw. You can still discard it with Super Poly or something like that to proc its effect. Now, Angler only has 1 printing from way back in Abyss Rising, and because of that, this card's price has been pretty crazy. At one point on the day of the ban list dropping, Nimble Anglers were up at $25 each. Fortunately, they have cooled down a lot. Nimble Anglers are a much more reasonable $10 each now, which honestly isn't too bad. Personally though, I wouldn't hold on to any more than the 1 or 2 that I need for my deck, since I think Angler will make a great reprint target for an upcoming OTS tournament pack, either as a super rare or common. The other engine that is being considered is the Evil Twin engine, and so we're going to look at Evil Twin Kiss-to-Kill. Evil Twins are not a new engine that the deck is looking at. We've seen Evil Twin Sprite do some really cool things this past format, and they actually allow the deck to do some interesting plays with Artifact Dagda. With the Evil Twin engine, you get access to a pop and a draw on both turns, as well as the ability to put multiple level 2 bodies onto the board that you can use to summon Sprite monsters out from your hand with. Now, I don't know if Evil Twin Sprite will be the best way to play the deck. It's certainly really strong and cool, and it can be quite consistent, but it might not be good enough to keep up with the tier limit cards, especially once the Ishizu stuff comes out in Magnificent Mavens, but I guess we'll have to just wait and see. Now, in terms of price, Evil Twin Kiss-to-Kill is a card that has literally been all over the place ever since the reveal of Sprite. At different points, people have looked at it as the next big engine, and then next they're talking about how it's clearly outclassed by other engines in the deck. With all of this fluctuating hype, we have seen a wave of different buyouts, with the card fluctuating anywhere between $20 and $50 over the last several months. The last ban list has caused yet another price jump. Immediately after the list dropped, Kiss-to-Kill went up to $50 a piece, but over the last week or so it has cooled back down to around the $35 mark. The Evil Twins were printed in Genesis Impact, which is back when Drytrons came out, but a lot of the Drytron cards were printed in last year's Megatins, so I'm not too sure of where or when the Evil Twin cards will finally get a reprint. Until we get something concrete, we can definitely expect to see more and more waves of fluctuation until an event like YCS Minnesota, where we can see what variants of Sprite actually make an appearance at the top tables. Next up, we have a pretty cool card here. It is Spellbook of Fate. The unbanning of Spellbook of Judgment was a pretty significant move. Spellbook of Judgment remains one of the most broken cards ever printed in the game's entire history, so naturally, people are expecting the Spellbook deck or engine to be used in some way. Because of this, Spellbook of Fate was targeted for a buyout. Fate is one of the main forms of interaction on your opponent's turn, providing a non-targeting banish of any of your opponent's cards. You could also use it to flip face down your own Spellbook Magician of Prophecy so that you could proc its effect again during your turn. Now, on top of that, it was only ever printed in Abyss Rising, whereas most other Spellbook cards have either been reprinted or were originally printed in lower rarities. Fate was only available as an Ultra or Ultimate Rare from this one set. This has led to a crazy price spike for either version of Spellbook of Fate. For the Ultimate Rares, you're looking at needing to spend $120 a piece, and for the Ultras, you're still looking at between $50 to $60 per copy. Obviously, this is a crazy high price, especially for a deck or engine that we're not even sure about, like what its role is going to be within the current format or if there's even room for it. Personally, I would be dumping any copies of this card that you guys happen to have. I'm definitely expecting to see it reprinted in one of the upcoming reprint sets, either in an OTS tournament pack or Battles of Legend Crystal Revenge. Next up, let's talk about Gurua, Wings of Resonant Life. So this is a card that I think kind of went under the radar for the first day or so after the ban list, but it really started to shoot up pretty soon after. This is a new fusion monster that just came out in Power of the Elements that everyone has been talking about as one of the best super polymerization targets, where you can fuse 2 monsters with the same type and attribute, but different names. Most notably, this card was used to fuse away your opponent's monsters with Super Poly in the Sprite matchup, and if you did it during the battle phase, this card having 1500 attack points meant that it could run over a copy of Sprite Elf as well. At the same time, Super Poly didn't get hit on the ban list like some people thought it would, so Super Poly remains a viable side deck card still. However, this card is also a really great monster to send from the extra deck to the graveyard with Nadir Servant, which just went to 3 on the list as well. Because this card has 1500 attack points, you can dump it off of Nadir Servant to search for Ecclesia, and then draw you a card with Gurua's effect as well, basically turning Nadir Servant into a copy of Sky Striker Mobilize Engage. Because of these applications, Gurua has almost doubled in price. It was down at around $10 to $13, but now the card is actually up to $25 a piece on TCG Player, which is absolutely insane for an ultra rare from a recent core set. It's been a few days and the card hasn't come down quite yet, and since it shouldn't be reprinted until next year's Megatons, I don't think it will. It might settle back down at around 20. But if the card continues to see competitive play this upcoming format, expect it to stay around the $25 mark and maybe even trend up to 30. And finally guys, the last card we're taking a look at here is Drytron Nova. So to be honest, I find Drytrons to be a very boring deck to play against. They try to set up a Herald and or a Vanity's Ruler and just kind of stop you from playing the game completely. And you also have to have like a Dark Ruler no more to be able to do anything at all, which is kind of annoying. But I guess it's kind of like Mystic Mine, so that makes it fair, right? Anyways, Drytrons did get a notable bump up on the ban list with Cyber Angel Benton going to 3, making the deck a lot more forgiving and a lot more like when it first came out without Union Carrier and Ava though. It's also worth noting that the deck is extremely budget friendly right now, with Fafnir being reprinted in the 2022 Megatons. Basically everything except for this card and the Ritual spell have now been reprinted. Of course, this means that people are wanting to buy the deck, put it together, and try it out. And with Drytron Nova being an important 3-of in the strategy, it's the card that has jumped up in price, going from under $10 to now being $28 a piece within a matter of a few days. With all of the other reprints that we've seen, and the fact that Konami doesn't really have anything else to sell or push related to the Drytron archetype, we should expect to see Nova reprinted before the end of the year. So unless you're a really big fan of the archetype and want to keep the core together, I would definitely look to move any of your copies of Nova now within the next few weeks. Alright guys, that is it for today's episode. Still a ton of changes coming up, and we do have the Darkwing Blast reveals coming up throughout the next couple of days. We'll be sure to take you through some more price jumps and buyouts that are happening because of this new upcoming core set, so make sure you guys keep an eye out for all of that. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, please make sure you let me know by slamming that thumbs up button for me. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think about the cards that we talked about today and what other cards are trending on the market as well. Also, if you haven't already, do make sure you hit that subscribe button to get all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.